She took a stranger to her ex's wedding, and that single desperate decision would change everything. But before we get there, before the moment everyone gasped and whispered her name, let's go back to where it all began. Abby had promised herself she'd never look back. After all, how do you face the man who broke you, especially when he's walking down the aisle with someone else? Yet, when the invitation came, she couldn't ignore the quiet voice that said, "Go." And that's where Jason enters the story. A man she didn't know, carrying a past he didn't talk about, and faith he was still trying to find again. A man whose eyes told stories of mistakes, loss, and something Abby had long forgotten: hope. So when she asked a stranger to stand by her side at the very wedding that once shattered her dreams, the world called it madness, but heaven called it divine timing, because what unfolded next wasn't just about love reborn, it was about redemption. It was about how God takes ashes and turns them into beauty. Have you ever been in that place, where your heart was broken, but you still hoped God could write a better ending, where you felt invisible until grace found you again? Then stay with me, because this story isn't just about Abby and Jason, it's about you. About what happens when we dare to believe that even the most painful chapters can lead to the most miraculous new beginnings. By the end of this story, you'll see that God doesn't just restore what was lost, He multiplies it. So before we dive in, take a second to subscribe, like this video, and share it with someone who needs to believe again, because tonight you're about to witness how love, unreal love, the kind rooted in Christ, can still surprise the world. Abby tapped her Metro card, rode the late afternoon train, and counted the stations like quiet prayers. New York moved around her in a blur. Yankees caps, tote bags, the rustle of autumn coats. She kept her left hand closed, thumb brushing the faint groove where a ring once sat. "Lord, help me breathe right now," she whispered, a petition between stops. In her tote, a stack of invoices, a church bulletin, and the envelope that changed everything. Cream paper, raised lettering, a date circled in blue pen she almost threw away, and a name that used to be a promise, now printed beside another woman's. The invitation had arrived with the morning bills, like a dare wrapped in calligraphy. She'd placed it on the kitchen counter beside the chipped mug that said "Blessed." Was she? On most days, yes, because gratitude was a choice she practiced. But gratitude and grief can share the same table, and that day they did. She thought of the apartment she could finally afford, the second job she worked weekends. She thought of the church in Brooklyn where she carried folding chairs after service. And she thought of him, laughing under fairy lights the night they planned forever. "Don't go," her friend Mia had said, leaning on a grocery cart at Trader Joe's. "You don't need that kind of self-inflicted wound." "Abby." "I know," Abby answered, tapping the cart handle like it was a metronome for courage. "But maybe going is how I stop running from the past." Mia sighed, slid a box of frozen waffles into the cart, and hugged her shoulder. "If you go, you don't go alone. We'll find someone. Someone? A friend, a date, a wall against the whispers." Abby smiled then, because the idea felt absurd and necessary at once. Not to compete, not to prove, but to steady her knees when the music started. When vows rang in the air like promises she once rehearsed. When eyes turned and memories tried to swallow her whole. She needed someone unafraid of awkward moments and honest about broken ones. Someone who wouldn't flinch at a story with frayed edges and surrendered endings. Someone who knew God could plant gardens in burned-over ground. The corner coffee shop near her job smelled like cinnamon and second chances. Baristas scribbled hearts on lids and talked playlists and parking tickets. Abby set the invitation on the counter to fish for her debit card. "Congrats?" the barista asked, confused by the fancy envelope. "Oh no," Abby said, tucking hair behind her ear. "It's complicated." "Best kind of stories," he grinned, sliding her a latte with extra foam. She turned and collided into a man balancing a black coffee and a folded newspaper. The coffee wobbled. His grip steadied. Her apology tumbled out. "No harm," he said, quick smile, voice low like a late-night radio host. A small coffee stain bloomed on his sleeve, and he didn't even check. "Let me grab napkins," she offered, already reaching for the stack. "Thanks," he answered, dabbing once, then glancing at the embossed invitation. "Big day?" he asked, then caught himself. "Or not yours?" "It's an old story crashing into a new day," she said, surprising herself. He laughed softly. "That sounds familiar." He wore an off-the-rack suit that didn't match the good leather shoes. His tie was loose, his hair a day late for a trim, his eyes too honest to be rehearsed. On the newspaper, a headline about layoffs, a photo of glass towers. Something about him carried the dignity of a man who had fallen and stood back up. "I'm Jason," he said, like a handshake offered in a storm. "Abby?" she answered, and her name felt safe in his mouth. They found the last open table near the window and its parade of umbrellas. New York rain made mirrors of the street and confessions of strangers. He unfolded the paper, then folded it again like the news could wait. "Rough morning?" she asked, pointing to the headline about downsizing. "Rough year," he admitted, a rueful smile traveling only halfway. "I used to think success was a ladder. Turns out it's more like a maze." "Sometimes God is kind enough to block the wrong exits," Abby said. He quick blinked, as if the sentence tugged a thread he wasn't ready to pull. "You said that like you've lived it," he replied. "I have," she nodded, tapping the invitation with one finger. "Once I thought I had a perfect plan. Then God loved me too much to let it stand." "And now?" he asked. "Now I'm trying to let him write without grabbing the pen back." He huffed a small laugh. "If you figure that out, teach me." The rain grew louder, a steady percussion under soft jazz and milk steam. "Tell me something true," Abby said, surprising them both. "That's a bold request for a stranger," Jason answered, not offended. "Strangers sometimes listen better than friends," she said, then shrugged. "True," he admitted and looked out at the taxis lining up like mustard-colored prayers. "Okay, something true. I failed people who trusted me." He didn't avert his gaze. He didn't overshare. He let truth sit at the table. "I signed deals I shouldn't have, chased numbers I couldn't justify," he said. "I told myself it was temporary, that I'd fix it once we hit the target." "The target moved," Abby guessed. "It always does," he sighed. "And when it did, the people didn't move with me." He turned the paper so the layoffs headline faced down like a confession turned over. "I'm learning the difference between regret and repentance," he added. "One aches, the other returns." Abby felt the room tilt toward stillness, sacred as choir practice at dusk. "Then maybe you're closer to healing than you think," she offered. "Because repentance isn't the end. It's the doorway." He looked at her like she'd just named a street he'd been circling for miles. "What about you? Tell me something true," he said. She traced the lid ridge with a thumbnail and inhaled cinnamon courage. "I was supposed to be married last spring." Jason didn't flinch. He didn't tilt his head with pity. He waited. "We planned a small ceremony, backyard lights, my pastor officiating. We had a playlist, a cake tasting, a savings jar on the counter." She smiled at the memory of coins dropping like glittering little hopes. 2 weeks before the wedding, he said he needed to think. 3 days later, he said he'd already started a new chapter, without me. I returned the dress and kept the lights in a box labeled "Someday." The rain softened to a hush, like a congregation catching its breath. "I wanted revenge," Abby confessed, "but God wanted resurrection. So I forgave in pieces, like tearing a page along a perforated line. Some days I felt strong. Some days I wanted to text paragraphs I'd regret. I learned to worship with tears, to tithe when dollars were thin, to serve when pride screamed. And lately, I've been praying for a heart that doesn't calcify around old pain. Which is why this," she tapped the invitation, "feels like a test. A test you don't have to take alone," he said gently. She almost laughed. "That's the thing. Mia says I need someone to go with me. A friend, a shield, a good pair of shoulders when the toasts get messy." Jason's mouth quirked. "You asking me for my shoulders, Abby?" She blushed, heat rising like a sunrise she hadn't scheduled. "Too soon, too strange, too." "Everything," she said, cheeks apologizing faster than words. "But yes, I guess I'm asking for presence. A steady human reminder that God is near." He turned the paper into a placemat for courage and set his cup down on it. "I don't know you," he said, "but I know the ache of rooms where you used to belong. I can behave. I can keep quiet. I can intercept gossip with weather reports. I can say, 'Excuse us,' and walk you outside when the soundtrack hurts. I can promise to make it about God's glory and your peace, not my ego. And I can leave the moment you need space." She exhaled a laugh that trembled into a prayer. "You're oddly qualified." They exchanged numbers like two people passing lifelines on a crowded ferry. He saved her as Abby, courage. She saved him as Jason, steady. Is that a lot to live up to? He joked, tucking his phone away. Only if you're pretending, she said. Authenticity has lighter luggage. He nodded. A man who'd carried too much weight in carry-ons of secrecy. What church? He asked, not as small talk, but as compass. New Hope on Dean Street, she replied. Wednesday prayer is my anchor. Then I'll meet you there before the wedding, he said. Let's ask God first. Abby felt tears press in behind her eyes, warm and unembarrassed. Thank you, she whispered, and meant it like a benediction. Do you believe God writes better twists than we do? He asked. I do, she said, lifting the blessed mug in her mind like a quiet amen. Then let's let him, he answered, half-smile, earnest and unvarnished. Outside, the rain stopped like a curtain opening. They stepped onto the sidewalk, the city rinsed and glittering. A kid on a scooter whooshed by, yelling, "Watch it!" like a tiny New Yorker. A food cart hissed, cinnamon pretzels scenting the air like a county fair. Jason walked her to the corner where the crosswalk counted down from 14. Text me the details, he said. I'll bring neutral colors and a brave face. And I'll bring a spine and a soft heart, she replied. Deal, he said, and they both smiled at the word. On the train home, Abby watched raindrops race along the window like tiny marathons. She thought of the box of fairy lights in her closet labeled Someday. Maybe someday wasn't a destination so much as a direction. She opened her notes app and typed, Pray with Jason Wednesday, go to wedding Saturday. Then she added, Ask God to turn the ashes into something useful for someone else. When the train emerged from the tunnel, the skyline rose like a chorus. She whispered, Lead, Lord, I'll follow. At home, she set the invitation on the fridge with a magnet shaped like a tiny cross. She brewed tea and answered Mia's text with a photo of neutral-colored courage. Mia called in 3 seconds, voice exploding through the speaker. Who is he? Calm, Abby laughed, explaining the coffee, the rain, the honesty. Mia listened, then exhaled. Strangers don't stay strangers long when God is involved. Just be wise, guard your heart, but let hope breathe. I will, Abby said, feeling a steadying peace move into the room. Across the river, Jason stood in a small apartment that looked more like a landing pad than a home. He placed the folded newspaper in the recycling and the truth in the light. He opened the top drawer where a cufflink waited for a promotion that never came. He closed it gently, then pulled out a slim Bible with worn corners. He hadn't opened it much in the maze, but doorways make you hungry for maps. He turned to Luke 15 and let the words return him to the Father's porch. Return, he read aloud, and the room felt less empty. His phone buzzed. Wednesday prayer, 6:30 p.m., New Hope on Dean Street. Thank you, he typed, wouldn't miss it. God goes first. Then he set the phone down and prayed a clumsy, honest prayer. God, I messed up the order of things. I put success where you should be. Help me stand beside Abby with humility, not performance. Let me honor you in rooms I once used to impress people. Teach me not just to regret, but to actually return. Back in Brooklyn, Abby pulled the fairy light box from the closet. She set it on the table like a memorial and a mission. With a Sharpie, she crossed out someday and wrote surrender. If the lights stayed in the box, they'd still be beautiful, but no one would see them. If her story stayed in the dark, it might feel safe, but it wouldn't help anyone. Use it, Lord, she said, palms open over the cardboard. Even this. That night, the city hummed, sirens like distant trumpets, laughter on stoops, a dog barking rhythm. Abby set an alarm for Wednesday prayer and one for Saturday's ceremony. She placed the invitation under her Bible and tucked courage under her pillow. When she finally slept, she dreamed of a sanctuary washed in warm light. In the dream, she stood beside a man with honest eyes and steady hands. They didn't speak. They just lifted the same prayer like a banner. And when she woke, the prayer was still there. Lead, Lord, I'll follow. The church on Dean Street glowed softly under string lights that swayed with the evening breeze. Cars hummed by and someone sold empanadas from a food truck across the street. Inside, folding chairs waited like open hands and the air smelled faintly of candles and rain. Abby arrived early, as always, her heart a mix of nerves and reverence. She set her phone to silent, straightened a crooked row of chairs, and whispered a small prayer. Lord, if tonight is the start of something you planned, help me not run from it. Outside, footsteps paused at the door, steady, unsure, familiar. Jason hesitated at the threshold like a man entering holy ground after years of drought. He wasn't sure why his hands trembled. Maybe reverence, maybe memory. The last church he'd walked into was marble and performance, not mercy. But tonight, something in the simplicity felt more like home. He caught Abby's eye near the front row. She smiled like grace personified. He nodded once, taking a seat near the aisle, letting the quiet hold him. When the worship began, something inside him cracked, not from guilt, but from recognition. The worship leader strummed a simple chord and voices rose like a tide. The lyrics spoke of surrender, of God turning brokenness into beauty. Jason didn't sing, not yet, but he mouthed the words, testing how they felt. Abby sang softly, eyes closed, palms open, unaware of who watched. When she lifted her hands, Jason noticed the small scar on her wrist, a reminder maybe of a time she'd fought for herself, for faith, for tomorrow. And suddenly the idea of going to a wedding with her felt less like pretending and more like purpose. After worship, Pastor Lewis stepped up, Bible open, smile kind, but discerning. Tonight, he began, we're talking about restoration, how God rebuilds what we thought was gone. Jason leaned forward, every word finding a place in his chest like seeds in tilled soil. Some of you think the story's over, the pastor said, scanning the room. But maybe God's just turning the page. Abby felt the words land deep. Her fingers gripped the notebook on her lap. Jason, too, felt like the message had been mailed directly to his heart. When the service ended, people gathered in small clusters, laughter soft, prayers honest. Abby stood near the back, sipping lukewarm coffee from a paper cup. Jason approached slowly, unsure if he was interrupting something sacred. "Hey," he said, voice low, humble. "You were right. God blocks exits for a reason." She turned, smiling, the kind that made forgiveness seem possible again. "Sometimes the only way forward is through surrender," she replied. He nodded, eyes glassy. "And maybe through people who remind us we're not alone." They sat on the front steps afterward, city sounds blending with cricket songs. A light drizzle misted the air, gentle and almost cinematic. Abby pulled her cardigan tighter. Jason offered his jacket without thinking. "Thank you," she said, but didn't take it. "You'll freeze." "I've been colder in rooms full of people," he replied, not meaning to sound poetic. She looked at him, really looked, and saw something she hadn't expected. Not charm, not pretense, just truth. "Why did you really say yes to coming?" she asked, watching cars blur by. Jason took a breath that felt like honesty waiting for permission. "Because when I met you, I saw stillness, the kind I used to have before I traded peace for power." She tilted her head. "You think God can give it back?" "I don't know," he said softly. "But I think he sent me here to find out." Abby nodded, eyes glistening. "Then maybe we're both rebuilding different parts of the same story." He smiled, a real one this time, unguarded, almost redeemed. The rain picked up as if heaven approved. Before leaving, Abby asked, "You really meant it? You'll go with me Saturday?" Jason hesitated only long enough to make the yes sound deliberate. "I will," he said. "Not as a distraction, but as a witness that you've healed." She blinked, caught off guard by the weight in his words. "I don't know if I'm healed yet." "Then maybe we'll let God finish what he started," he said simply. And in that moment, something holy settled between them. Not romance. Not yet. Just presence. As they parted, Pastor Lewis walked by and nodded toward Jason. "Good to see you back in the house, son." Jason smiled, surprised the pastor remembered him from years ago. "I'm trying to stay this time," he said. "Then don't try alone," the pastor replied, patting his shoulder. "Grace travels better in company." He watched Abby disappear into the crowd of umbrellas and felt the truth of it. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like running. Later that night, Jason walked along the East River, city lights flickering on the water. He passed couples laughing, joggers praying with playlists, and old men feeding pigeons. He found a bench and sat, head bowed, not in shame but gratitude. "God, I don't know what you're doing," he murmured, "but thank you for Abby." The wind carried the prayer across the water into unseen spaces, and for once Jason didn't feel invisible. He felt found. Across town, Abby stood by her window, fairy lights now hung and glowing. She decided not to hide them anymore. Each bulb reflected a small piece of her, fragile but illuminated. She journaled the night's prayer, God, let my courage inspire faith in someone else. She paused, then added, and thank you for Jason. He listens like you do, quietly, fully. Outside, thunder rumbled far off, but the city stayed awake. So did her heart. Saturday's wedding loomed ahead like both a storm and a sunrise. Abby didn't know what awaited her there. Closure, humiliation, or divine surprise. But she knew this. She wouldn't be facing it alone. Jason's steadiness felt like an answered prayer wrapped in human form. And somehow, deep down, she believed that God wasn't just sending her back. He was sending her through. Because healing, she realized, often walks hand in hand with obedience. She set out her dress that night. Nothing extravagant, just grace stitched in fabric. And beside it, she placed her Bible, open to Isaiah 61:3, to bestow on them a crown of beauty instead of ashes. She smiled softly, whispering, "You've got a strange way of writing love stories, God." The verse shimmered in lamplight like a promise whispered through eternity. She closed her eyes, peace washing over her tired heart. And somewhere across town, Jason prayed the same verse aloud. The next morning, Abby woke to a golden slice of sunlight cutting through the curtains. The city outside was already alive. Taxis honking, children laughing on their way to school. But inside her apartment, peace lingered like the echo of last night's worship. She poured coffee into her chipped, blessed mug and smiled at its irony. Once she'd seen that word as something fragile, dependent on circumstance. Now she understood that blessing was often disguised as becoming the person God could trust with the miracle she prayed for. Jason, meanwhile, laced his sneakers and ran through Central Park before sunrise. The cold air bit his lungs, but it felt clean, purifying, almost sacred. Each stride carried memories he was ready to outgrow, boardrooms, betrayals, balance sheets. He'd built a life so high that no one could touch him, not even God. But when it collapsed, he realized altitude wasn't the same as purpose. This morning he wasn't chasing success. He was running toward surrender, toward the quiet voice he'd ignored for years but couldn't escape anymore. Later, as he passed a street preacher handing out tracts, he stopped. The man looked tired, rain-soaked, but his eyes burned with conviction. Jason took one of the small papers, half out of courtesy, half out of hunger. It read, "God still uses broken men to build beautiful stories." He folded it carefully and tucked it into his wallet. Not superstition, but faith. Maybe, he thought, that was what Abby had been trying to tell him all along. That redemption doesn't erase the past. It redeems it. That evening, Abby helped at the church pantry, sorting cans with other volunteers. She laughed with them, but her mind drifted to Saturday, to Jason, to what awaited. Could God really use such a strange pairing for his glory? Every can she stacked felt like a metaphor for rebuilding piece by piece. When she dropped one and it rolled under the shelf, she crouched, laughing softly. A little boy beside her said, "It's okay, miss. Sometimes things fall before they fit right." She froze for a second, because even out of a child's mouth, God was still speaking. Jason showed up near closing time holding a bag of fresh bread. "I figured feeding the hungry could use carbs," he said, trying to sound casual. Abby looked up from the crates, surprised but not shocked, more like grateful. The other volunteers smiled, exchanging glances they didn't bother hiding. He joined her in stacking loaves, sleeves rolled, hands steady and real. "I didn't plan to come," he admitted, "but I felt pulled. By faith or guilt?" She teased gently. "Maybe both," he said, and they laughed. As they worked, she noticed something new in his face. Gentleness replacing the guardedness. When he smiled, it wasn't out of charm but relief, as if grace had loosened his jaw. He asked her questions, not about the wedding, not about her ex, but about her. Her favorite psalm, her favorite city spot, how she kept believing after so much loss. She answered with honesty, her voice soft but anchored in something deeper than pain. And when the lights dimmed, they found themselves still talking, still listening, still safe. Maybe, Abby thought, healing doesn't always arrive in thunder. Sometimes it whispers through kindness. Outside, they stood beneath a streetlight flickering against the night mist. Jason looked at her, hesitated, then said, "You know, I think God's not done with either of us." Abby smiled, eyes shimmering with both caution and hope. "I don't think he ever is," she said. "We just stopped noticing the chapters he keeps writing." For a long moment, they stood in quiet agreement. two souls stitched together by grace. Then Jason opened the door for her, whispering, "See you Saturday, and may it be holy, not painful." She nodded, stepped into the light, and whispered back, "Amen." Saturday dawned with a hesitant sun, as if even the sky wasn't sure about shining. Abby stood by the window, dress draped over a chair, tea cooling untouched on the counter. The city outside looked ordinary, but her heart, it pulsed with holy chaos. She'd promised herself she wouldn't cry, not today, not again, yet every breath felt like a question. Was this bravery or self-inflicted pain? She closed her eyes and whispered, "God, if I walk into that room, walk with me." The clock ticked once, as if heaven had just nodded. Across town, Jason knotted his tie in a mirror that still had moving boxes stacked beneath it. He'd stayed up reading Psalm 147, "He heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds." The verse clung to him like armor, not perfection, but preparation. He wasn't sure what he was walking into, but he knew why. This wasn't about appearance. It was about obedience. God had told him to show up, not to perform, but to protect. He straightened the tie, grabbed his keys, and whispered, "Lead me where grace is needed." When Jason pulled up outside Abby's building, she was already waiting. Her dress was simple, ivory with a soft blue scarf that caught the morning light. For a second, he forgot every speech he'd rehearsed. She looked like peace learning to walk. "Ready?" he asked, voice gentle, steady as a promise. She smiled, though her hands trembled. "Ready or not, here faith comes." He opened the car door, and for a heartbeat, the world slowed down. It wasn't romantic. It was reverent, like stepping into a story God had written himself. The venue sat just outside the city, a glass chapel framed by autumn trees. Guests drifted in, laughter and perfume blending into a bittersweet haze. Abby's name whispered through the crowd like a rumor no one could resist. Jason noticed her chin lift slightly higher with each glance thrown her way. She wasn't here to reclaim anything. She was here to release it. He leaned in and whispered, "You're doing better than half of heaven right now." She laughed under her breath. "Then I hope heaven's clapping." Inside, the ceremony had already begun. Her ex stood at the altar, hands clasped, face painted in polished calm. The bride beside him glowed, not cruelly, just innocently unaware. Abby's stomach nodded, but she kept breathing in prayerful rhythm. Jason guided her to the far end of the aisle, where they could blend into stillness. When music swelled, he reached for her hand, not to claim, to steady. And she didn't pull away. Every note of the love song cut like memory wrapped in melody. The same song she'd chosen once for her own first dance that never happened. Tears pricked, but she blinked them back, focusing on the cross above the altar. "Keep your eyes there," she told herself. "Not on what was, but on who is." Jason watched her, a quiet awe spreading through him. Her strength wasn't loud, it was sacred, forged in surrender. He whispered, "You're not here by accident," and she almost believed him. Then came the vows, words she'd written in her mind years ago, now recycled by others. Each sentence was both healing and haunting, like echoes returning to their source. When the groom said, "I'll cherish you forever," Abby felt something finally break, but cleanly. It wasn't bitterness, it was release, a holy exhale. Jason felt her fingers loosen in his, then tighten again, grounding herself in grace. She didn't cry. She rose inside, because sometimes victory looks like silence that refuses to shatter. During the reception, laughter filled the air like glass clinking under chandeliers. Abby stood near the edge of the crowd, her heart steadying with each song. Jason brought her a glass of water, simple, grounding, merciful. "Still breathing?" he asked, eyes kind, humor soft. "Barely, but breathing is victory enough," she said, smiling faintly. The DJ announced the first dance and the crowd erupted in applause. Jason whispered, "Come outside for a minute, before the noise steals your peace." They stepped onto the terrace, the evening wind brushing her hair against his shoulder. Below, fairy lights twinkled over the lake, shimmering like fragments of redemption. Abby leaned on the railing, exhaling months of pain into the open air. Jason didn't speak. He knew silence was sometimes the most sacred prayer. Finally, she said, "I thought I'd feel anger, or regret, but I just feel peace," he nodded. "That's how you know forgiveness took root." And in that moment, she knew God had been preparing this ending all along. But inside, whispers started to stir, curiosity dressed as gossip. Who was the man beside Abby? Why was she even here? Someone snapped a picture, posting it with a caption she'd later regret reading. Jason noticed the stares, the smirks, the quiet judgment dripping from glasses of champagne. He stepped closer, not possessive, protective. "Let's leave," he said calmly. "You've already won what you came for." She looked at him and realized he was right. They walked toward the parking lot, stars beginning to push through twilight. Behind them, laughter rose again, but this time it didn't sting. Abby turned for one last glance, not at him, but at the cross atop the chapel. "Thank you," she whispered. "For endings that lead to beginnings." Jason opened the car door, offering his hand once more. This time she took it without hesitation. And for the first time, it didn't feel like survival. It felt like resurrection. The ride home was quiet, but not empty. Streetlights flickered on, painting their reflections across the windshield. Jason drove with one hand, the other resting loosely over his Bible on the seat. Abby gazed out the window, city lights weaving through her thoughts. "Do you think God ever laughs at how he sets things up?" she asked suddenly. Jason smiled. "All the time. He's the best storyteller I know." And she laughed, really laughed, the kind that sounds like chains breaking. When he dropped her off, she didn't rush to the door. They stood in the glow of the street lamp, neither wanting to end the moment. "Thank you," she said softly, "for being here, for all of it." "You don't owe me thanks," he said. "God just let me borrow a front row seat." Her eyes shimmered. "Then I hope he keeps you close for the next chapters too." He smiled, small, sincere. "Only if he writes me in his way," and she nodded. "That's the only way worth reading." Inside her apartment, the fairy lights still glowed softly across the window. Abby slipped off her shoes, laid the blue scarf on the table, and exhaled peace. She opened her Bible to Isaiah again, the same verse, the same promise. But tonight it felt fulfilled. In the margin, she wrote, "He turned ashes into clarity." Tears welled, not of sadness, but gratitude too deep for words. Somewhere in heaven, she was sure, angels smiled at the sight. Meanwhile, Jason parked outside his building, engine idling under city noise. He pulled out the folded verse he'd carried since the day they met. God still uses broken men to build beautiful stories. He looked at the words, then at the skyline, whispering, "So be it, Lord." In that prayer, something inside him shifted, repentance becoming purpose. He wasn't sure what God planned next, but he knew this much. He never wanted to go back to the man he used to be. As the city quieted, Abby stepped onto her balcony with a blanket and tea. Below her, streetlights shimmered like a path of small miracles. She whispered a final prayer before sleep took her gently by the heart. "Thank you, Jesus, for rewriting what I thought was finished." And in that stillness, she felt something warm and unmistakable. Peace. Not the fragile kind that depends on circumstances, but the eternal kind that only grace can build. And though neither of them knew it yet, this was not the end of their story, only the turning of a divine page. Because when God begins to redeem, he never stops halfway. The wedding was over, but the restoration had just begun. And as dawn would later rise again, so would they, whole, forgiven, and new. The city slept, heaven watched, and grace continued writing. Sunday morning arrived quieter than usual, the kind of silence that feels like grace catching its breath. Abby brewed coffee and stood by the window, watching sunlight stretch across the rooftops. Yesterday's storm, emotional and divine, had left her strangely peaceful. She hadn't expected freedom to feel like calm instead of fireworks. Her phone buzzed with messages. Mia, her pastor, even her aunt. "Proud of you, honey." But one text stood out, Jason's. "Thank you for letting me stand beside strength yesterday." She smiled softly, not realizing that message was the beginning of something new. Jason sat at his small kitchen table, still in his t-shirt from the night before. The folded verse lay next to his coffee mug like a compass pointing home. He'd prayed longer than usual that morning, not for success, not for clarity, but for faithfulness. It felt foreign, but good to start his day not with a plan, but with surrender. He'd told God, "If you want me to keep walking beside her, show me how," humbly. And as he opened his Bible, his eyes landed on Proverbs 16:9. "In their hearts humans plan their course, but the Lord establishes their steps." Later that afternoon, Abby went to the park to breathe, just breathe. Children laughed near the swings. Joggers moved to playlists. Pigeons competed for crumbs. Normal life, simple, beautiful, and completely untouched by her old pain. She sat on a bench, scrolling absent-mindedly through photos from the wedding. Someone had tagged her in a post, the one Jason had warned her about. She hesitated, heart fluttering, and tapped the screen anyway. The caption read, "She showed up with a stranger but left with her head high." At first she wanted to cry, to delete, to hide. But then unexpectedly she smiled. Because that sentence he meant to mock was actually true. She had left with her head high, not from pride but redemption, and maybe that's how God turns even gossip into testimony. Just then her phone buzzed again. "Hey, just checking in and walk later?" Jason's timing once again felt suspiciously divine. They met near the pier as the sky blushed in shades of orange and rose. Jason arrived holding 2 paper cups, one black coffee, one caramel latte. "Guessing yours hasn't changed," he said, extending the cup with a grin. "You remembered," Abby said, taking it, warmth meeting her palms. "I don't forget things that matter," he replied almost shyly. They walked along the boardwalk, breeze teasing her scarf, silence comfortable. The city glimmered behind them, but for once both felt fully present. "You handled yesterday like someone born for peace," Jason said quietly. Abby shook her head, eyes soft. "Born for pain maybe, but peace came later." "Still, it looked like strength," he said. "Even heaven must have clapped," she laughed, tucking hair behind her ear. "You in that line, heaven clapping. Well, if angels rejoice for one sinner repenting, they must celebrate one woman forgiving." That stopped her mid-step, and because she realized he wasn't flattering her, he was seeing her. And that was rarer than love itself. "Do you ever feel like God brings people back into your life to test you?" she asked. Jason nodded, kicking a pebble into the waves. "Every lesson repeats until it's learned." She smiled sadly. "I think yesterday was my final exam." "Then you passed," he said gently. "And I think God curved the grade." They laughed together, but under the laughter was something new, tenderness. Not romance yet, just quiet recognition of shared healing. The kind that only grows where humility lives. That evening, they found a small diner tucked between brownstones, open late and half empty. The waitress poured coffee with a tired smile, and a gospel song humming faintly from the kitchen. Jason leaned back in the booth, eyes thoughtful. "You ever wonder why God lets us break before he rebuilds us?" Abby nodded. "Because cracked ground drinks rain better." He smiled slowly, as if storing that line somewhere deep. And for a long moment they just sat, healed silence louder than words. When she got home, Abby texted Mia, "He's not who I expected, but maybe who I needed." Mia replied instantly, "Be careful, hearts heal slower than they break." Abby knew she was right. But still, she couldn't shake the sense that God was weaving something beyond logic. Something about Jason's presence made her faith feel practical again, not poetic. He didn't preach. He listened. He didn't try to fix, he prayed. And maybe that was what her heart had been missing all along. Meanwhile, Jason knelt by his bedside, the city hum low beyond his window. "Lord," he whispered, "if you're opening this door, teach me to walk through it with clean hands." He prayed for Abby, not to fall for him, but to keep trusting you. For her peace, her healing, her calling, her courage to stay soft. He didn't notice the tears until one hit the floor like punctuation. When he rose, he felt lighter, like repentance had finally turned into renewal. And for the first time in years, he felt worthy of tomorrow. Days passed like chapters being written by unseen hands. Abby and Jason saw each other often, not planned, just providence. At the church pantry. At the same coffee shop, once even at the farmer's market. Each meeting felt natural, not orchestrated, divine coincidence in plain sight. They talked about scripture, mistakes, and the art of beginning again. He told her about his failed company, the investors he'd disappointed, the friends he'd lost. She didn't judge, she just listened. And in that listening, redemption found space to breathe. But peace rarely arrives untested. One morning, Abby opened her email and froze. It was from her ex, and short, formal, unsettling. "Can we meet? I need closure." Her stomach tightened, old anxiety resurfacing like a ghost from deep water. She stared at the screen, torn between fear and faith. Jason's name hovered in her recent messages, just one tap away. She whispered, "Lord, do I face this? Or let silence speak for me?" That night, she told Jason about the email while they walked along the East River. He listened without interruption, gaze steady, hands in his pockets. When she finished, he said softly, "Closure isn't always a meeting. Sometimes it's a boundary." She sighed. "I know, but I also don't want to run from what doesn't own me anymore." Jason nodded slowly. "Then don't go alone. I'll wait nearby, not to interfere, just to pray." She looked at him, surprised by the gentleness in his tone. And for a second, she saw what grace looked like when it wore skin. The next day, Abby met her ex at a cafe near Central Park. He looked older, polished but tired, like guilt had trimmed his edges. "I shouldn't have left the way I did," he began. "You didn't deserve that." Abby's pulse steadied, not from pride but peace. "I forgave you a long time ago," she said. "Not for your sake, Mana, for mine." He blinked, unprepared for mercy. "You really moved on, huh?" She smiled gently. "God made sure of it." Outside, Jason watched from across the street, coffee in hand, praying under his breath. He didn't want to save her. He wanted to see her free. When she walked out, her shoulders were lighter, her eyes brighter. She spotted him and smiled, that same quiet, world-healing smile. "It's done," she said simply. Jason exhaled, almost laughing. "So is the past." They stood there, the city moving around them, and peace felt like home. Later that night, Abby journaled the day in her worn notebook. The past came knocking, but God answered instead. She closed the cover, heart still warm with gratitude. And for the first time, she didn't feel haunted. She felt held. The light from her window fell across the page like divine punctuation. She whispered, "If this is just the beginning, Lord, I'm ready." And heaven, unseen but smiling, whispered back, "Then turn the page." That week, the church announced a volunteer project, rebuilding homes for families after a storm. Abby signed up immediately, feeling God stirring something new inside her. When she arrived at the site, Jason was already there, sleeves rolled, hammer in hand. Their eyes met across the half-built porch, and both smiled like it was scripted by heaven. They worked side by side, sweat and laughter mixing under the afternoon sun. Every nail driven into wood felt like redemption being built in real time. And somewhere between paint cans and prayers, trust began to take root. During lunch, they sat under the shade of an oak tree, sharing sandwiches and stories. Jason told her about the mentor who'd once believed in him before everything fell apart. "How did you make peace with the people you disappointed?" Abby asked gently. "I didn't," he said. "God did. But he made me go back and make things right." She nodded slowly, realizing their paths weren't parallel by accident. They were intertwined. "Maybe that's why he brought us together," she whispered. "So we'd rebuild not just walls but hearts." Jason smiled, eyes soft. "If that's the plan, I'm all in." As the day ended, the sunset bathed everything in gold, the kind of light that feels alive. Abby leaned against the porch rail, hair wind-tousled, cheeks flushed with purpose. Jason joined her, silent for a while, watching kids chase each other through the grass. "I used to think redemption was about fixing things," he said. "Now I see it's about surrender." She turned to him, voice gentle. "Maybe fixing is God's part, and surrender is ours." He nodded, emotion flickering behind his calm expression. "Then we're finally learning the right rhythm." And in that golden hour, peace didn't just visit, it stayed. That night, Abby couldn't sleep. Her heart was full, but not restless, expectant. She sat by her window, watching raindrops begin to trace slow paths down the glass. Her thoughts drifted to Jason, his steadiness, his humility, his growing faith. She wasn't sure what this connection was yet, but she knew who was behind it. "God," she whispered, "if this is you writing again, don't let me interrupt the story." Lightning flashed faintly in the distance, followed by gentle thunder like heaven's amen. And with that, she finally fell asleep, smiling, surrendered, and ready for what came next. Monday morning brought a new rhythm, lighter, steadier, almost sacred. Abby woke early, her alarm drowned by birdsong and the city's waking hum. She made coffee, flipped open her journal, and smiled at the words she'd written. God rebuilds slowly, but completely. The pages smelled faintly of ink and hope, like morning devotion turned into breath. For the first time in a long while, she didn't dread the week ahead. But peace, she'd learned, often comes with its own kind of test. And this one would soon knock on her door. At work, the office buzzed louder than usual, whispers disguised as laughter. Someone had seen a photo of her and Jason at the volunteer site. The caption read, "Looks like love is blooming at New Hope." It was harmless to most, but for Abby it reopened something fragile. Not shame, but fear of being misunderstood again. She'd spent months rebuilding her name after heartbreak and gossip. And now the world was watching again just when she'd found peace. Jason heard about it first. A coworker sent him the post with teasing emojis. He scrolled once, sighed, and set his phone face down on the table. It wasn't the attention that bothered him. It was how quickly the world twisted redemption into romance. He wasn't ashamed of Abby. He was terrified of misrepresenting what God was doing. That afternoon he called her, voice low and calm. "Hey," he said, "have you seen it?" "I have," she answered, steady but sad. "And I'm praying we handle it right." They met at the same coffee shop where they'd first collided, full circle again. Rain pattered softly against the window, blurring the street into watercolor peace. Abby stirred her drink, eyes fixed on the swirl of caramel foam. "Funny how the world wants to name things before God does," she said quietly. Jason nodded, shoulders tense, eyes thoughtful. "Yeah, but I'd rather let God define this story." Her gaze met his, brave and clear. "Me too." And in that unspoken agreement, peace returned, gentle but rooted. Still, the tension lingered like humidity before a storm. At church that Wednesday, a few glances turned curious instead of kind. Mia whispered encouragement beside her, but Abby still felt exposed. After service, Pastor Lewis approached them both with a knowing smile. "I've seen the posts," he said, chuckling softly. "Don't worry, truth outlives rumor." Jason exhaled, visibly relieved. "We just want to honor God in how we walk this." The pastor nodded. "Then keep walking in the light. Let love grow under his timing, not theirs." The next morning, Jason's company called him into a meeting, unexpected and tense. The board was restructuring, and whispers of his past decisions had resurfaced. He'd worked for months to rebuild trust after his old business collapsed. But one former partner decided to drag his name through public mud. As he listened to accusations he'd already confessed years ago, his heart sank. He left the meeting with a folder in his hand and a prayer in his mouth. "God, please, don't let the past undo what you're restoring." That evening, Jason showed up at Abby's door, tired, rain-soaked, but still composed. She opened the door and saw it instantly, the weight behind his quiet eyes. "Rough day?" she asked gently. He nodded, running a hand through his damp hair. "Old mistakes don't like to stay buried." "Then maybe they're not graves," she said softly. "Maybe they're altars." He blinked, unsure whether to laugh or cry. "You always turn pain into poetry." "No," she said. "God just gives me better language for survival." They sat on her couch, the city glowing faintly outside her window. Jason explained what had happened, the meeting, the accusation, the fear of losing everything again. Abby listened without interruption, her presence a kind of healing all its own. When he finished, she said, "You don't owe the world proof of change. You owe God obedience." Her words hit deep, anchoring him to something steadier than reputation. He smiled weakly. "Then obedience it is." She reached out and took his hand, silent prayer passing between them like current. The following days tested them both, patience, faith, and trust in divine timing. Some people whispered, others speculated, but Abby and Jason chose to keep serving, to keep showing up. They returned to the construction site every weekend, hammering nails and hope side by side, and with every house finished, their own foundations grew stronger. Their connection wasn't built on romance. It was built on resilience, and resilience under grace becomes love's holiest form. One Friday afternoon, Mia called Abby with news she didn't expect. "Your story's spreading," she said. "People are sharing your testimony online." Abby froze. "Testimony?" "Yeah," Mia laughed. "Someone from church posted about how you faced the past with grace." Abby scrolled, finding the post, a simple picture of her and Jason painting a wall together. The caption read, "God doesn't just restore reputations, he restores purpose." Tears blurred her vision as she whispered, "Only God could turn rumors into revival." That weekend, Pastor Lewis asked them to share a few words at Sunday service. Abby's instinct was to decline, She didn't want the spotlight, but Jason encouraged her gently. Maybe someone needs to hear your version of grace. So they stood side by side at the altar, microphones trembling in their hands. Abby spoke first, anchored about pain, about forgiveness, about walking into a wedding she wasn't invited to emotionally survive. Jason spoke next, about failure, repentance, and finding faith again through someone's quiet strength. When they finished, the room was silent. Not awkward, but reverent. Then slowly, people began to clap. One, then another, until the sound filled the sanctuary. Mia cried. Pastor Lewis nodded. Even strangers stood to their feet. Abby looked at Jason, overwhelmed, whispering, "What just happened?" He smiled through tears. The truth outlived the rumor. And in that moment, they both knew. This wasn't their doing. It was grace, alive and visible, turning scars into testimony, and heaven was indeed clapping. After the service, they walked outside into the golden light of afternoon. Children laughed, pigeons scattered, and life carried on, redeemed, renewed. Abby turned to Jason, smile tender but certain. "Do you ever think this is how love begins?" He chuckled softly. "Not the kind the world writes about, the kind heaven authors." They walked toward the park, shoulders brushing, silence comfortable. No declarations, no rush, just presence and peace. Because love built on redemption doesn't need proof, only purpose. That night, Abby wrote one line in her journal before turning out the light. Faith doesn't make life easier. It makes it clearer. She underlined it twice and closed the cover. Outside, rain began to fall, steady and rhythmic like a benediction. Across town, Jason sat by his window, praying the same prayer as her without knowing. "Lord, keep our hearts aligned with you, not with noise." And somewhere in the middle of the storm, peace covered them both like a promise. As weeks passed, the noise faded, replaced by quiet respect. Jason's situation at work resolved. The truth surfaced and his integrity stood firm. Abby continued volunteering, mentoring young women at church about forgiveness. Their paths kept crossing, not because of coincidence, but calling. Neither pushed, neither forced. They just walked faithfully where grace led, and as they did, their friendship began to bloom into something deeper. Something that looked less like infatuation and more like destiny unfolding slowly. But God wasn't done shaping their story. He was preparing them for a harder test. One that would challenge what they'd built, not destroy it, but refine it. Because every promise worth keeping must first walk through fire, and this time the fire wouldn't come from the world. It would come from within. Jason would face a decision that could cost him everything, and Abby would have to choose whether to trust God or her own heart. The next chapter was waiting, and heaven was holding its breath. The email came on a Thursday morning, short, formal, and heavy with temptation. Jason reread it 3 times before breathing again. A major investment firm wanted him to lead a new project. Big money, bigger stage. The same kind of stage that had once stolen his peace and almost his soul. It promised redemption in the world's eyes, but compromise in God's. All he had to do was overlook a few gray areas and sign the contract. He leaned back in his chair, whispering, "Lord, not this test again." By lunchtime, his phone buzzed with congratulations from old colleagues. "Looks like you're back on top," one text read. He didn't reply. Instead, he scrolled through the messages and felt nothing but unease. Success used to thrill him. Now it made him tremble. He walked to the window, city stretching endlessly beneath him like a glittering trap. He knew what the offer meant: status, headlines, applause. But he also knew what it could cost: peace, humility, and the faith he'd fought to rebuild. That night, Jason called Abby. "I got an offer today," he said quietly. "A big one." "That's good, right?" she asked, sensing the hesitation in his tone. "It depends," he said. "It's the same kind of deal that broke me before." She listened, heart tightening with empathy and worry. "Then maybe God's giving you a chance to prove that you're not the same man anymore," she said softly. Silence filled the line, holy, searching silence. "Would you pray with me?" he finally asked. "Of course," Abby said, already closing her eyes. Her prayer was simple but fierce. Lord, let Jason choose peace over prestige, purpose over pride, you over everything. When she finished, neither spoke for a while, only the sound of shared breathing through the phone, steady and sincere. Thank you, he said, voice thick. You always pray like you've seen the end of the story. She smiled softly. Because I trust the author. The next morning, Jason met with the firm's executives in a glass tower overlooking Manhattan. They talked numbers, visions, and market opportunities, their words smooth as silk. He listened politely, nodding, but his heart thudded in resistance. When one of them slid the contract across the table, he froze. It was everything he'd once chased, and everything he'd since surrendered. He looked at the pen in his hand and whispered a silent prayer. Then he set it down and said the words that cost him the world but kept his soul. No. The room fell silent. One man laughed awkwardly, thinking he was joking. Jason met their eyes, steady, unashamed. I appreciate the offer, but I don't build things that compromise truth anymore. The executive leaned forward. You're walking away from millions. Jason stood, gathering his notes. I've already gained peace. That's worth more. He left the room, the city wind hitting his face like holy applause. And though he'd lost the deal, he felt richer than he'd ever been. Abby found out hours later when Jason texted, didn't sign, chose obedience. Her eyes filled with tears before she could even respond. She typed back, Heaven's proud of you, and so am I. Then she sat quietly on her couch, letting gratitude wash over her. For once, she wasn't inspired by someone's strength. She was witnessing surrender, and it moved her deeper than any victory story ever could. Because this wasn't about success. It was about salvation lived out loud. That Sunday, Pastor Lewis preached about Daniel in the furnace. How many of us, he asked, can trust God in the fire, not just after it? Abby's eyes drifted to Jason a few rows ahead. He sat still, hands clasped, face calm, refined by his own fire. When the pastor said, sometimes obedience burns before it blesses, Jason exhaled, almost laughing. Their eyes met briefly, both recognizing the sermon wasn't coincidence. It was confirmation. After the service, Jason lingered near the steps, waiting as Abby greeted friends. When she finally joined him, the city hummed softly around them. You ever notice how God doesn't reward comfort, only courage? He said. She smiled. Then you must have just signed up for a promotion in heaven. He laughed quietly, shaking his head. If peace is the paycheck, I'll take it. They began walking down the street together, side by side, same pace, same rhythm. And even without saying it, both knew something between them had changed. But peace never comes untested. Later that week, a business magazine published a short piece. Former CEO rejects comeback offer, again. Some called him foolish, others brave. A few mocked his religious integrity. The attention spread fast, and suddenly his name was back in headlines. Abby saw the article before he did and prayed silently, protect his heart, Lord. When Jason called that night, he laughed nervously. Guess I'm famous again. Maybe for the right reasons this time, she said. Truth deserves its own headline. Still, the fame stirred something uncomfortable inside him. People he hadn't heard from in years started calling. Investors, friends, critics. They all wanted to talk, to congratulate, to question. And though he smiled politely, his peace began to tremble. He didn't crave attention anymore, but attention seemed to crave him. Late one night, he stood at his window, heart pounding with doubt. God, am I really strong enough to carry this spotlight and still see you? The next day, Abby found him at the church, sitting alone in the last pew. The sanctuary was empty except for the sound of rain against stained glass. He looked up when she entered, eyes weary but honest. I thought saying no would end the noise, he said quietly. She sat beside him, close enough for silence to speak. Sometimes the devil doesn't tempt us with sin. He tempts us with applause, she said. He nodded slowly. Then I need to get quiet again. They prayed together right there. No music, no crowd, just rain and reverence. Jason's words came out halting, but sincere. God, strip away everything that makes me forget you, Abby added softly, and give him the strength to stay humble when others wouldn't. Tears came easily this time, not of weakness but purification. When they finished, Jason whispered, "Thank you." She smiled, voice steady. Fire doesn't destroy gold. It proves it's real. And he knew she wasn't talking about the company anymore. That evening, Abby received a message from an unknown number. It was from a journalist requesting an interview about Jason's story. She hesitated, heart racing, sensing the potential danger. "Lord," she whispered, "should I protect him or let his story shine?" She waited, praying for wisdom instead of impulse. Finally, she replied kindly, "He's not seeking attention, just transformation." And as she hit send, peace wrapped around her like a shield. Meanwhile, Jason spent the night writing a letter to himself, a practice Pastor Lewis had suggested. He wrote, "Remember where God found you. Remember who held you when no one else did. Remember, peace is not a product. It's a person." He folded the note and tucked it inside his Bible. Tomorrow, he decided, would be a Sabbath, a day to rest, to listen, to breathe. No phones, no noise, no striving. Just stillness before the one who'd rescued him from himself. And for the first time in days, he slept without tension in his chest. Sunday arrived with soft sunlight filtering through his blinds. Jason walked to church early, Bible under his arm, gratitude heavy in his heart. He didn't know what the future held, but he no longer needed to. Abby greeted him at the door, smiled gentle, eyes bright with quiet pride. "I see peace suits you," she teased. He laughed softly. Peace fits better than success ever did. And somewhere above them, heaven whispered its amen. That afternoon they returned to the park where it had all begun. The same bench, same view. Children's laughter echoed and the skyline shimmered like redemption retold. Jason took a deep breath, finally ready to speak the truth forming in his heart. "Abby," he said, "I don't know where this is going, but I know who's leading it." She looked at him, tears of recognition welling in her eyes. "Then let's keep walking," she whispered, "one prayer at a time." And with that, the fire that had tested them turned into light that guided them forward. That night, Abby journaled under lamplight, words flowing like worship. Faith is proven not by what we gain, but by what we refuse to lose. She paused, smiled, and wrote one more line. "He didn't choose me. He chose God. And that's why I can trust him." Across town, Jason closed his Bible on the same verse she'd underlined weeks ago, Isaiah 61:3. To bestow on them a crown of beauty instead of ashes. He whispered, "You've done it again, Lord." And in the stillness, both knew the refining wasn't punishment. It was preparation. Morning poured through Abby's window like quiet mercy, warm and uninsistent. She held her mug with both hands, letting the heat slow her thoughts. Peace had been steady lately, but peace also asks for courage. Her journal lay open to a blank page that felt like a threshold. "What if love is less about arrival and more about surrender?" she wrote. Then she paused, hearing her pastor's voice. "Grace is weighty, but it won't crush you." She underlined the sentence twice, as if fastening it to her ribs. At church, a women's group met in the fellowship hall with cinnamon rolls and honesty. Abby listened as stories folded open. Divorce, prodigal sons, panic that visits at 3 a.m. When it was her turn, she spoke of weddings and altars and unexpected peace. She didn't say Jason's name, but hope slipped into the room anyway. A young mom asked, "How do you trust again after everything?" Abby exhaled slowly. "You don't start with a person, you start with God." And even as she said it, her heart whispered, "Teach me to live this." Across town, Jason met his mentor for coffee in a dented diner booth. The older man's hands were scarred from years of building businesses and people. "So you said no to the golden cage?" And the mentor smiled, eyes crinkling. Jason nodded, grateful and unsettled all at once. Good. Now say yes to what matters, the mentor said, tapping the table. What is that exactly? Jason asked, honest as the steam from his cup. Character that stays when applause leaves and love that serves when no one sees. That afternoon, Abby received a message from a crisis hotline she volunteers with. A teenager she'd counseled before was asking for her by name. Please pray. Please call. I did something dumb. Abby's pulse quickened. Love is heavy, she remembered, and grace shows up. She stepped onto her balcony to phone the girl, praying for words that heal. 30 minutes later, the storm had calmed. Hope had a pulse again. Abby texted Jason only one line. God showed up. Please keep praying. Jason read the message at his kitchen counter and closed his eyes. Thank you, he breathed, then added aloud. Make me useful, Lord. He wanted to run to Abby, to be present, to carry some of that weight. But another voice, quieter and wiser, said, pray first. Ask, don't assume. So he texted, do you want company or quiet? She responded, quiet with a side of Psalm 34:18. He smiled, opened his Bible, and sent the verse like a bomb. 2 days later, their paths crossed at the pantry again, crates of produce, laughter, purpose. They worked shoulder to shoulder, comfort like a well-worn hymn. Thank you for praying, Abby said, tying a bag of oranges. Always, Jason answered, meaning it more than yesterday. He hesitated, then asked, what scares you most right now? She didn't deflect. Opening the door to love and finding a mirror of my past. He swallowed. What scares me is failing the love I pray to receive. That evening, Mia hosted a small worship night in her living room. Fairy lights looped across bookshelves. A guitar found the key of peace. When they sang, Abby felt a tremor under the melody, fear asking to be named. She whispered, Lord, take my guard down without breaking me. Across the room, Jason sang with eyes closed and palms open, not performing, returning. And Abby felt the room shift, the way fields do when rain finally comes. After the songs, Mia cleared her throat with a mischievous grin. Okay, family, testimony time. Groans, then nervous laughter. Jason went first, short and unvarnished, about the deal refused and quiet kept. Abby spoke next, voice steady, about the teen, the hotline, the God who arrives. A friend asked, so, are you two? The room held its breath. Abby smiled gently. We're letting God define this, Jason nodded. And we're trying not to rush what he wants to ripen. The next morning, Abby's supervisor asked her to lead a community project. Public-facing, tight deadlines, interviews with local press, visibility she hadn't sought. People trust your calm, the supervisor said, and your story gives others courage. Abby's heart stuttered. Visibility had teeth and memory. She texted Jason, pray. I'm being asked to step forward, he replied, praying. Step only as fast as peace can walk. She smiled. Wise men write small sentences that move mountains. Midweek, the magazine that had covered Jason called Abby for comment. We're highlighting integrity and leadership. Your perspective matters. Abby's finger hovered above ignore, then she paused to pray. Is this platform or purpose, Lord? She called Jason first, honor before headlines. I'll support whatever honors God, he said. You don't owe anyone a narrative. Abby exhaled. Then I'll choose silence unless speaking serves someone's healing. That night, Abby dreamed of a narrow bridge over wide water. She walked carefully until wind pressed hard against her chest. On the other side, a hand waited, steady, familiar. She reached for it, surprised to find her own name written there. When she woke, she understood. God wasn't asking her to grab Jason. He was asking her to grab identity first. Beloved before betrothed, whole before woven. They met at a quiet park, wind tearing gold leaves from low branches. Abby decided to be braver than her fear. I like you, she said, cheeks burning but voice true. Jason's eyes softened, gratitude surfacing without hurry. I like you too, he answered, reverent, like stepping on holy ground. But I want what pleases God more than what eases loneliness. She nodded, relief and longing sharing the same seat. A jogger passed. A child laughed. Time remembered how to move. Jason said, I think love grows best where pressure is light and truth is heavy. Abby smiled. Then let's keep truth heavy. They set a rhythm. Pray on Wednesdays, serve on Saturdays, rest on Sundays. They kept their messages honest and their pace human. They practiced blessing each other's callings more than craving each other's presence. And strangely, desire didn't shrink, it clarified, but growth attracts resistance. Abby's ex posted a carefully worded update online, half apology, half revisionist history. "Sometimes the kindest thing we can do is release what wasn't meant," he wrote. Comments swelled. Someone tagged Abby. Rumors revived for an encore. Her chest tightened, the body remembers old fires. She typed, deleted, typed again, then placed the phone face down. "God, guard my mouth and magnify your truth," she prayed. Jason saw the post an hour later. Heat rose, old protectiveness knocking hard. He started to draft a defense, then stopped mid-sentence. "Lord, is this my fight or yours?" His anger cooled into clarity. Protect in prayer. Proceed in peace. He texted Abby, "I saw it. I'm with you. Want me silent or near?" She replied, "Near but quiet." "Let God talk louder than us," he whispered. "Amen," and shut the world out for a while. That weekend, the volunteer crew finished the storm-damaged porch. A family stepped onto it, tears shining like new varnish. Abby handed the mother a basket. Jason tightened the last hinge. "Feels like we built more than wood," the father said, voice thick. Abby glanced at Jason, agreed without words. Love, it turns out, is carpentry with heaven's blueprints, and grace is the weight that keeps the structure honest. Sunday's message landed like rain on tilled soil. Perfect love casts out fear. Abby felt it in her sternum, a loosening where anxiety used to live. Jason felt it too, like God gently removing old armor. After service, they walked the long way to the subway. "I'm afraid of losing what's finally good," Abby admitted. Jason nodded. "I'm afraid of becoming the man who breaks what he's given." They stopped, prayed, and gave their fears a proper funeral. That night, Mia sent Abby a voice note, laughter in every syllable. "Girl, I've watched you carry grace like it's heavy because it is. But look at you. You're strong." Abby grinned, pressing play again just to feel bolstered. She opened her Bible to 1 John 4 and traced the word perfect. "Not flawless," she whispered. "Complete." She wrote in the margin, "Let love grow up in me." Then she turned off the lamp and let the verse hold her till sleep. Across the river, Jason drafted an apology he might never need. Not to Abby. He intended to keep protecting her, but to anyone he'd hurt before returning. He listed names, prayed over each, trusted God with timing and courage. Restitution, he'd learned, is love in work boots. He sealed the letters in a folder labeled Return. "Tomorrow," he told the Lord, "I'll start knocking on old doors." Peace answered like a nod in the dark. Days passed, and rumors grew bored. Truth outlasted the noise again. Abby's community project launched. Kids with paint on their cheeks, elders cutting ribbons. Jason stood in the crowd unseen except by her, and that was enough. Afterward, he handed her a water bottle and a grin. "You looked like purpose out there," he said. She blushed. "You looked like prayer." They laughed, both grateful to like what they were becoming. That evening, as twilight braided pink into blue, Abby named the lesson out loud. "Grace is heavy because it carries both mercy and responsibility," she said. Jason nodded, eyes warm. "And love is strong because it lifts with both hands." They stood on the familiar pier, waves writing psalms against the pylons. He didn't reach for her hand. She didn't rush the moment. They simply let hope breathe at its God-given pace. And hope, unhurried, grew tall. Before bed, Abby wrote one line that tasted like freedom. "I don't need guarantees when I'm held by a God who keeps covenants." She closed the journal, tucked it under her pillow, and smiled at the ceiling. Across town, Jason folded his return letters and placed them by the door. Tomorrow would ask for courage. Tonight he'd rest under kindness. Both whispered the same prayer without knowing, "Keep us low, keep us true." And heaven, pleased, began preparing the next chapter's grace. Sunlight spilled through the curtains, soft and gold like a benediction. Abby stirred her coffee, mind drifting toward all that had changed and all that hadn't. The storm had quieted, but faith kept her awake in gratitude. She replayed the last few weeks like a film she didn't want to end, how obedience had turned into peace and peace had turned into purpose. Yet beneath it all, she felt something gentle and holy stirring deeper. Not a question anymore, but an answer unfolding in slow motion. Jason spent the morning writing one last letter from his return folder. It was to himself, honest, repentant, redeemed. He sealed it and placed it in the church offering box, letting the past finally rest. For the first time, his heart didn't ache when he thought about failure. It simply thanked God for the detours that brought him here. He walked outside, the cool air brushing across a soul made new. The fire hadn't ruined him. It had refined him into someone God could trust again. Later that afternoon, Abby hosted the closing ceremony of her community project. Children ran between tables, their laughter dancing through the park. Banners read "Restored by Grace," a phrase that now carried her entire testimony. Jason arrived quietly, sleeves rolled, helping serve lemonade without fanfare. When their eyes met across the crowd, it wasn't fireworks, it was recognition. Two people who had walked through storms and still chosen gentleness. And in that simple exchange, love looked less like passion and more like peace. After the event, they found a quiet bench overlooking the lake. The water shimmered with the orange blush of sunset. Abby broke the silence first. "I used to think love had to be dramatic to be real." Jason smiled softly. "Now I think it just has to be consistent." She nodded, tracing invisible ripples with her finger. "Do you ever wonder," she asked, "why God made us wait?" Jason replied, "Because he wanted the roots deep enough to survive the rain." For a long moment, they simply sat. No rush, no performance, no need. The quiet between them was full, like prayer shared without words. Jason finally said, "I used to pray for a second chance at success. Now I realize God was preparing me for a second chance at love." Abby smiled, eyes glistening, "And maybe I had to lose mine to find the kind that lasts." A breeze passed through, gentle as mercy. Some stories don't start with yes, they start with surrender. Days later, Jason was invited to speak at a business conference. He hesitated but accepted, deciding to tell the truth, not polish it. On stage, he said, "Redemption isn't reputation repair, it's resurrection." The audience went silent, then stood in applause, not for him, but for honesty. Abby watched the recording later, tears streaming freely. She whispered, "He doesn't just lead meetings anymore, he leads hearts." And for the first time, she thanked God for every heartbreak that led to this healing. That Sunday, the church was packed for testimony service. Pastor Lewis called them forward, Jason first, then Abby. He spoke of surrender. She spoke of stillness. When she said, "Sometimes God rebuilds through people who were never supposed to meet," the congregation erupted in amens and quiet tears. Jason turned to her, voice low but steady. "And sometimes he keeps them there on purpose." No one knew it. But in that moment, two prayers silently aligned. Outside after service, rain began to fall, the soft baptism kind. Abby laughed, lifting her face to the sky. Jason watched, hands in pockets, memorizing the piece she wore. "You'll catch a cold," he teased. "Then it'll be a joyful one," she replied, spinning once under the drizzle. He shook his head, smiling. "You find grace in every weather, don't you?" She looked at him, eyes bright. "Only because God keeps sending it." That evening, they helped clean the church hall, stacking chairs, folding tables, mopping floors. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt sacred. Abby hummed softly to herself, the same song from months ago at prayer night. Jason recognized it and joined quietly on the next line. Their voices blended like harmony learned through hardship. And in that moment, they realized, love built on faith doesn't need a soundtrack. It is one. As the weeks passed, the world finally stopped watching. The gossip ended, the headlines faded, but their story kept unfolding in private. Jason began mentoring young entrepreneurs about ethics and grace. Abby started leading workshops on healing through forgiveness. Their ministries ran parallel, but often crossed paths in divine timing. Whenever they prayed together, others felt something different, authentic, lived faith, the kind that preaches louder than sermons. One evening, they visited the rebuilt porch where everything began. The family greeted them with hugs, laughter, and gratitude. A little girl pointed at Abby and said, "You're the lady who fixed our home." Abby knelt down, smiling. "No, sweetheart, God fixed all of ours." Jason watched her, heart swelling with reverence. He didn't see perfection, he saw purpose. And in that moment, he knew he wasn't just part of her story, he was part of her calling. Later, they walked back to the car in comfortable silence. The sky was deep violet, city lights flickering awake. Jason stopped halfway and said, "Abby, I've been praying about us." She froze slightly, half curious, half afraid. He smiled, patient. "Don't worry, it's not a proposal." "Not yet," she laughed, exhaling tension. "Then what is it?" "It's gratitude for the way you've taught me to love God more than outcomes." She stepped closer, voice soft. "And you taught me that faith isn't fragile, it's fearless." He reached out, brushing a raindrop from her cheek. Whatever we are, it's not built on chance. It's built on choice. Every day," she whispered. "Every prayer." They didn't kiss. They didn't need to. The silence between them said everything. Sometimes the most sacred love stories end in worship, not fireworks. Months later, they stood together before the same congregation, not as a spectacle, but as servants beginning something new. Pastor Lewis smiled, blessing their partnership in ministry and in heart. Their story had begun in brokenness and ended in belonging. The crowd cheered, but they only saw the cross behind the altar. "God writes better endings," Abby whispered. Jason nodded. "Especially when we stop trying to edit them." As life continued, they learned that grace isn't a finish line, it's a rhythm. They built slow, steady days, volunteering, praying, laughing, healing. Sometimes they disagreed. Sometimes they misunderstood. But they never stopped returning, to faith, to humility, to each other. Their love became a living parable, ordinary, imperfect, eternal. Because when God authors a story, it doesn't fade with the applause. It deepens in the silence that follows. And on one quiet evening, as the sun sank behind the skyline, Abby wrote her final journal line. "We were strangers once, but grace turned us into home." She closed the book, heart full, eyes wet, soul still. Across town, Jason prayed the same prayer he'd whispered that very first day. "Lead, Lord, I'll follow." And heaven, smiling, sealed their chapter with a sigh of contentment. Love had learned to stay. If this story touched your heart, remember, God still writes redemption stories today. Share this video with someone who needs to believe in second chances. Leave a comment below. What part of Abby and Jason's journey spoke to you most? And don't forget to subscribe to Redeemed Hearts, where every story reminds us, grace rebuilds, love redeems, and God never wastes a broken beginning. Because when faith meets love, miracles don't end and they continue.